The desert wind had died with the setting sun, leaving the Apache camp in a strange, heavy silence. Smoke rose in thin curls from the dying embers of the central fire, painting the dusk in shades of orange and gray. Coyotes cried far off across the barren ridges, but closer, everything was still. Inside a small tipi made of tanned hides and cedar poles, shadows flickered against the walls. Shifting with every movement of the firelight, the warrior stepped inside, his moccasins silent on the packed earth. His long black hair was tied back with a strip of deerskin, his chest marked with faint streaks of red clay from the day's ritual. He had returned from scouting enemy territory, tired and covered in dust. But something felt wrong. The air inside his tipi carried a scent that wasn't his, something softer, something human yet unfamiliar. He paused, his instincts sharpening. The crackle of the fire sounded louder than before, and then there was the faint sound of breathing. He reached for his knife but didn't draw it yet. Instead, he listened. Then, as if the shadows themselves trembled, he saw her, a pale figure crouched near his bedding of buffalo hide. Her golden curls shimmered in the dim firelight, her face streaked with dirt, her dress torn but modest. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The woman froze like a frightened deer caught in torchlight, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound coming out. His voice was low, steady, but edged with danger. "Who are you?" he asked in his native tongue first, then again in broken English. She flinched at the tone but didn't run. Instead, she whispered, "Please, don't hurt me. I thought this place was empty." Her words hung in the smoky air, empty. His eyes narrowed as he took in her trembling hands. The torn hem of her dress and the faint bruises on her wrist. She wasn't one of his people, that much was clear. Her accent was from faraway southern plains, maybe a settler's tongue. His people had seen her kind before, riding in wagons, crossing sacred lands as if they were just maps to be conquered. He stepped closer, every movement measured, his eyes locked on hers. "You came into an Apache's home?" he said quietly, his English rough but certain. "That is not empty." Her breath caught. She seemed to shrink under the weight of his gaze, but something in her eyes, defiance, maybe desperation, made her stay still. "I was running," she murmured. "There were men behind me. They burned our wagon. I just needed somewhere to hide." His jaw tightened. He could almost hear the truth in her voice, but the desert had taught him long ago not to trust too quickly. Still, there was something raw about her, no arrogance, no command, just fear and exhaustion. The wind outside picked up again, rattling the tipi poles. "Who were they?" he asked. She shook her head, clutching the fabric of her sleeve. "Outlaws, maybe soldiers. I don't know. I just kept running until I found this valley." Her eyes darted to the ground. "I didn't mean to enter your home." He took another slow step toward her, studying her as one might study a wounded creature unsure whether it would bite or break. His people had a saying, "Those who enter a warrior's home uninvited either bring fate or death." Which one she brought, he couldn't tell yet. "Why didn't you run when you saw me?" he asked. Her eyes met his, and for the first time her voice carried a small, trembling courage. "Because I have nowhere left to run." The simplicity of that answer cut through the silence like an arrow. For a long moment, he said nothing. The firelight played over his strong features, the calm intensity in his dark eyes, the stillness of a man who had survived too many storms. Then, quietly, he knelt beside her. He noticed the cut on her arm and the way she tried to hide it. Without asking, he reached for a pouch of herbs hanging from one of the tipi poles and dipped his fingers into a mix of crushed leaves and ash. "You will let me fix this," he said. It wasn't a request. She hesitated, watching his every move as he pressed the mixture gently over her wound. His touch was firm, but not cruel. The scent of sage filled the air, mingling with the smoke. For a moment, the world outside disappeared. The wind, the fire, the danger. There was only the sound of her quiet breathing and his steady hands. She looked at him, trying to understand what kind of man he was. His hair fell past his shoulders, his skin bronzed by the sun. His body marked with scars that told stories older than any words. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. He didn't answer at first. His gaze drifted toward the fire, as if the answer lived in its flames. Because you were in my tipi, he said finally. And because you looked at me without hate. Her heart beat faster. Not from fear anymore, but from something else. Something unfamiliar. She didn't know his name, didn't know his tribe or his story. But she felt a strange pull in his words, a weight that promised both protection and danger. Outside. The wind howled through the canyons, carrying the smell of dust and smoke. Somewhere out there, the men who had chased her might still be looking. She turned toward the tipi entrance as if expecting them to burst through at any moment. He noticed and reached out, his hand closing around her wrist, not hard, but firm enough to stop her. You will not leave now, he said. They will find you. Her voice wavered. Then what do I do? He leaned closer, his eyes dark and unflinching. You stay here. You stay quiet. You are under my protection now, she blinked, unsure if she had heard right. Why would you protect me? You don't even know me. His expression didn't change. The land knows you. It brought you here. Then, lowering his voice to a near whisper, he added words that made her breath hitch in her chest. Now you're mine. The words weren't cruel, they were ancient, bound to a code she couldn't yet understand, but their meaning hung between them, like the tension before a storm. She stared at him, caught between fear and something deeper, something that felt like safety wrapped in fire. He stood and moved toward the tipi entrance, pulling the hide flap shut. Outside, the last light of sunset had died, and darkness crept down from the hills. Inside, the only glow came from the fire that flickered between them, painting their faces in shades of gold and shadow. He turned back once, his silhouette framed by the dancing light. Rest, he said quietly. Tomorrow we move before sunrise. She wanted to ask where, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't harsh, only final. He sat down again near the fire, cross-legged, silent as stone, while she wrapped herself in a rough blanket. The warmth of the tipi and the steady rhythm of the flames lulled her, though her mind refused to rest. Who was this man who claimed her safety and her fate with such calm certainty? Was she safe in his hands, or had she just traded one danger for another? As the night deepened, her eyelids grew heavy. But just before sleep took her, she thought she saw him glance her way, not with threat, but with something that looked almost like sorrow. The wind shifted outside, whispering through the desert brush, and the fire popped softly. In that fragile peace between two worlds, the white woman's fear and the Apache's vow, fate waited. Silent and patient, for the dawn to come. The night passed slowly inside the tipi. The woman drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, haunted by the memory of fire, gunshots, and the men who had chased her through the wilderness. Each time she opened her eyes, she saw the faint outline of the Apache sitting near the fire, still and silent like a shadow carved from stone. He hadn't moved for hours, only watched the flames and listened to the night. Something about his presence made her feel both trapped and strangely safe. When the first light of dawn slipped through the tipi flap, she stirred. The Apache turned his head slightly, his eyes opening as if he hadn't slept at all. He rose without a word, his movements smooth and deliberate. Outside, the sky was still pale, painted in soft streaks of orange and silver. The camp was quiet, save for the distant cry of an eagle. He stepped out first, scanning the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, with red cliffs standing tall in the distance and dry sagebrush trembling in the morning wind. She followed him hesitantly, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Her boots were torn, her dress dirt-stained, but she didn't complain. The cold air bit at her skin, and for a moment she simply watched him, how he moved, how he listened to the wind as if it spoke to him. "Do you live here alone?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he bent to check the tracks near the camp's edge. His sharp gaze followed something invisible to her. Only after a long pause did he speak. Not always. She waited for him to say more, but he didn't. His words were like the desert, sparse, but full of meaning if one looked. Long enough, he walked toward the stream that cut through the valley, and she followed, her steps clumsy compared to his. The water was clear and cold, flowing over smooth stones. He knelt, cupping water in his hands to wash his face. She hesitated, then did the same, the chill of it waking her completely. When she glanced at him again, she noticed the faint scars across his back and arms, marks of battles fought long before she ever came into his life. She wondered who had given them to him, and what kind of man carried such calm with such pain. "You never told me your name," she said. He looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Names mean little in the wild," he replied. "But you may call me what your tongue can speak." She tried to smile, though it faded quickly. "Then tell me one. Something I can remember." After another pause, he said, "They called me Silent Hawk." His voice was low, but there was pride in it, and something else. Loneliness. She nodded. "Silent Hawk," she repeated, the words strange but soft on her lips. "Thank you for letting me stay." He gave no reply, only stood and adjusted the strap across his shoulder where a bow hung. Then his eyes hardened again, turning toward the cliffs. "We cannot stay long. Men were near this valley last night." Her pulse quickened. "You saw them?" "I saw their fire," he said. "Too close. They will return when the sun is high." A sense of dread settled over her. She remembered the faces of the men who had chased her off, cruel and armed. They had taken everything, her wagon, her supplies, her brother. She swallowed hard and whispered, "They'll kill me if they find me." He looked at her then, his dark eyes sharp but steady. "Not while I live." The way he said it left no room for argument. She followed him back to the tipi where he began to pack what little he owned. Dried meat, a knife, a pouch of herbs, a small carved figure made of bone. He moved with quiet precision, wasting no words. She watched him in silence, her thoughts tangled. Who was this man who spoke so few words, yet carried such strength in every movement? Why had fate led her to him of all people? And what did he mean when he said she was his? When the sun rose higher, they set out together. He walked ahead, guiding the way through narrow canyons and dry ravines. She tried to keep up, her legs aching, her breath shallow. Every so often he would stop, listening to something unseen, then signal her to stay quiet. The desert around them seemed endless, yet he moved through it as if every rock and shadow told him a story. At midday, they stopped beneath a cluster of cottonwoods. She sank to the ground, exhausted. He offered her a piece of dried meat and a gourd of water. She took them gratefully, though her hands shook. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked between breaths. "Since I was a boy," he said. "The desert teaches what no man can. It kills the weak, spares the wise." "Do you have a family?" He paused, his eyes drifting to the distance. "Once, the soldiers came when I was young. They burned our village, took the women. I was left with the wind and the fire." Her chest tightened. "I'm sorry." He looked at her then, as if her sympathy was a foreign thing he didn't know what to do with. "Do not be sorry. The past is like smoke, it vanishes when you try to hold it." For a while they sat in silence. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, and the shadows of hawks crossed the ground. She felt small under the vast sky, like the desert could swallow her whole. But beside him, she also felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: safety. He suddenly lifted his head, listening. A moment later, she heard it too, the distant thud of hooves. Her heart leaped. He motioned for her to stay low. Crawling to the edge of the rocks, he peered toward the open plain. In the shimmer of the heat, several riders appeared, 5, maybe 6. The same men who had hunted her? "They found us," she whispered. He reached for his bow, stringing an arrow with a calmness that made her tremble. "They follow tracks like fools," he said. "They do not know the land." She wanted to believe him, but fear twisted inside her. "What will you do?" "What I must," he said simply. He waited until the riders came closer, their voices faint in the wind. Then, in one swift motion, he loosed an arrow. It cut through the air and struck the lead rider's hat clean off. The man shouted, pulling his horse to a halt. The others scattered, shouting orders. Dust rose around them. Silent Hawk turned to her. "Run to the rocks. Do not look back." She hesitated, her heart pounding. "What about you?" He met her gaze, and for a brief second, there was something fierce and almost tender in his eyes. "Go," he said. "You are under my protection. Remember that." She ran. Her feet stumbled over the rough ground, but she didn't stop until she reached the shelter of the rocks. From there, she looked back and saw him standing alone in the open, bow drawn, ready to face whatever came. The riders shouted, firing shots that echoed through the valley. The sound made her flinch, but the Apache didn't move. He knew the land, every ridge and hollow. The moment they advanced, he vanished into the shadows like smoke. Minutes stretched into hours. The desert grew quiet again, the sun dipping low behind the cliffs. She crouched beneath the rocks, trembling, unsure whether he was alive or dead. Then, just as the light began to fade, a figure appeared at the edge of the canyon, walking slowly but upright. It was him. He carried his bow, dust covering his skin, a streak of blood along his arm. When he reached her, she rushed forward. "You're hurt," she said. "It's nothing," he replied. "They will not follow again tonight." She looked at him, relief flooding her chest. "You saved me again." He looked past her toward the fading horizon. "You were brought here for a reason," he said quietly. "The desert chose you. Now it will test you." She didn't understand what he meant, but his words sent a chill through her. As the sky turned deep crimson, they returned to the shelter of the rocks. The fire he built burned small and steady, casting long shadows on the stone walls. For the first time, she saw a hint of weariness in his eyes, the kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. She wanted to thank him, to tell him she didn't know why he had spared her, but the words wouldn't come. He sat across from her, silent as ever. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind began to rise again, whispering through the canyon. She glanced at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Silent Hawk, what happens now?" He looked at her, his face unreadable in the firelight. "Now," he said slowly, "you learn why the desert never lets go of those it claims." The firelight flickered in his eyes, and for the first time she felt that her story with this man and this land had only just begun. The night deepened, and though the world outside slept, something between them had awakened, bound by survival, by fate, and by the words he had spoken the night before. Words she still couldn't forget. "Now you're mine." The next few days passed like a blur of dust and silence. They moved before sunrise, resting only when the sun burned too hot to walk. The woman followed behind the Apache through narrow trails that twisted between cliffs and dry riverbeds. She no longer asked where they were going. Every time she tried, he only said, "Farther from danger." His words were few, but his eyes were always searching the horizon, reading the ground for signs only he could see at night. When they made camp, she watched him work in the flicker of the firelight. He always built the flames small, hidden behind rocks so that no one could see their glow. He would hunt quietly, returning with rabbits or wild quail, skinning them with calm precision. She helped as best she could, though her hands trembled when she held the knife. There was no conversation, but there was a quiet understanding forming between them, one that neither of them spoke of. The more time she spent with him, the more she began to see that his silence wasn't coldness. It was habit, carved deep by years of surviving alone. His face rarely changed, but sometimes, when he looked toward the stars, she caught a trace of sadness, something unspoken that belonged to a different life. One night, while the wind howled through the canyon, she finally asked, "Do you ever think about leaving this land? Going somewhere new?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed fixed on the fire. "The land is not something I leave," he said. "It made me. It owns me." His answer lingered in her mind long after. She turned away, staring into the dark, wondering if anyone would ever come looking for her, or if she was. Already forgotten by the world she came from. But their uneasy peace didn't last. On the fourth day, they came across the remains of another camp. The ashes were cold, but the footprints were fresh. Silent Hawk knelt, pressing his fingers to the dirt. His face darkened. "They are close again," her breath caught. "The same men." He nodded. 3 horses. One with a broken shoe. His voice was low and steady, but she could hear the tension behind it. They hunt for something. Or someone. Her heart raced. Then we have to keep moving. He stood, scanning the canyon walls. We can't outrun horses on open ground. We must hide where they cannot track. They left the path and moved into a ravine where the rocks rose high on both sides. The air grew cooler, and the echo of their footsteps disappeared into the narrow passage. They followed the sound of trickling water until they reached a small cave hidden behind a curtain of vines. He motioned for her to go inside first. It was dark and damp, the air heavy with the scent of moss and stone. When he entered after her, the space seemed even smaller. She could hear his breathing close to her, steady and calm. They won't find us here, he said quietly. Not tonight. She sat against the wall, pulling her knees close. The cave felt safe, but the thought of being trapped inside with danger outside made her chest tighten. How long will they keep searching? She asked. As long as they think you're alive, he replied. She looked at him in the dim light filtering through the vines. Why do they want me so badly? I have nothing. He was silent for a moment before answering. Sometimes men don't need reason. Sometimes they chase what they think they own. His words hit her like a knife. The truth behind them stirred old memories. She tried to bury the men from the wagon train. The one who had looked at her with something far worse than hatred before the attack. She shuddered and turned away, unable to meet his eyes. Outside, thunder rumbled far in the distance. A storm was forming over the desert. The sound of rain against the rocks came slowly, then harder, until it echoed through the ravine. Water began to drip from the cave ceiling, and the faint glow of lightning flickered through the entrance. Silent Hawk moved closer to the opening, listening. The storm will hide our scent, he said, but we must stay until it passes. Hours went by, and the storm raged. The wind screamed across the canyon, and the rain poured in sheets. The woman tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time thunder cracked, she flinched. Then she felt his hand warm and solid, resting gently on her arm. She looked up, startled. You are safe, he said. His tone wasn't soft, but there was something in it that steadied her heart. Why are you helping me? She asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't know me. You could have left me that night. He looked away, as if answering would reveal too much. Because once someone helped me when I was hunted, he said finally. And because the spirits led you into my tipi, that means something. She watched him, unsure if he truly believed what he said or if he simply needed to believe it. Either way, she felt the weight of his conviction. When the storm finally ended, dawn came gray and heavy. The desert smelled of wet earth and sage. Silent Hawk stepped out first, scanning the horizon again. But when he turned back, his expression was grim. Tracks, he said. They found the valley. Her heart sank. So they'll find us here? He shook his head. Not if we move now. They left the cave and began climbing toward the upper cliffs. The rocks were slick, and she slipped more than once, but he was always there, steadying her with a hand or a quick pull. By midday, they reached a plateau overlooking the endless desert. From there, she could see smoke in the distance, thin trails rising like warnings. He crouched beside her. That is where your hunters camp. She felt fear creep through her again. They won't stop, will they? No, he said quietly. Men like that only stop when the world takes them. They rested for a while, hidden among the rocks. The sun was merciless, and the wind carried the faint sound of voices from below. She wanted to ask him what their plan was, but before she could, he said something unexpected. There is a place north of here, he said. An old village. My mother's people once lived there before the war came. It's hidden by cliffs. If we reach it, they will not find you. Will we be safe there? He looked at her, and for once, his expression softened. Nothing in this land is truly safe, but it is sacred ground. Even your enemies may fear to enter it. So they began their journey north. The path grew steeper, the nights colder. She learned to move quietly, to gather wood the way he taught her, to tell time by the position of the sun. Every day she saw more of who he was, not just a warrior, but a man burdened by memories and guided by something older than himself. Yet the closer they drew to the sacred valley, the more uneasy he became. He would stop suddenly, his eyes scanning the distance, as if listening to whispers she couldn't hear. One evening, when they made camp among red rocks, she found him sitting apart, staring at a feather tied to a string around his wrist. "What is that?" she asked. He held it up. "A memory," he said. "For my brother. He was killed in the raid that burned our home." She sat beside him quietly. "Was that the soldiers?" "Yes. They came saying they brought peace, but they brought fire. My brother was brave. He fought until the end. I wear this so the spirits know I remember." She felt a pang of sadness for him. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He turned to her, his gaze deep and steady. "You carry sorrow, too. It shows in your eyes." She nodded, tears threatening to rise. "I lost my brother, too." That night, when they burned the wagon, the silence that followed was heavy but not empty. For the first time, they shared something beyond survival pain that crossed two worlds. But the moment didn't last. As the fire flickered lower, he suddenly lifted his head. The faint sound of hooves came from beyond the rocks. "They found us again," he said sharply. She froze. "What do we do?" He stood, stringing his bow. "You hide. I'll draw them away." "No," she said, grabbing his arm. "You'll be killed." He looked down at her hand, then at her face. "If I die, you live. That is how this must be." Before she could argue, he was gone, disappearing into the shadows like he always did. She crouched behind the rocks, her heart pounding as voices echoed across the desert. She heard shouting, then the sound of a gunshot, another, then silence. The waiting was unbearable. Every sound in the night seemed sharper: the rustle of wind, the cry of a hawk. When she could bear it no longer, she stepped out, calling softly, "Silent Hawk." No answer. The darkness around her stretched endlessly. Somewhere out there, he was fighting for her life. And as fear gripped her, one thought repeated in her mind. The same words he had whispered that first night in his tipi, words that now felt like both a promise and a curse. "Now you're mine." The night swallowed the desert, and the wind carried the echo of gunfire through the canyons. She stood frozen, her heart thundering in her chest, her hands gripping the rocks as if they could hold her world together. The sound faded, replaced only by the low moan of the wind and the uneasy silence that followed. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, but every part of her screamed to go after him. Silent Hawk was out there, somewhere in that vast darkness. Facing men who would kill without mercy, she took a few steps forward, calling his name again, her voice breaking. No answer came. Only the rustle of the dry brush and the distant crack of a dying campfire. Fear pressed down on her until she could hardly breathe. Then, from somewhere beyond the rocks, she heard movement, a horse snorting, a boot striking gravel. Her pulse quickened. It could have been him. It could have been them. She crouched low, clutching the small knife he had given her. The air smelled of gunpowder and wet earth. When the sound drew closer, she caught a glimpse of a shadowed figure moving through the canyon, tall, broad, and steady. Relief washed through her before she even saw his face. "Silent Hawk," she whispered. He appeared through the dim light, his steps uneven. Blood streaked down his arm, and his bow hung loosely at his side. When she ran to him, he caught himself on the rocks, breathing heavily. "You're hurt," she said, trying to steady him. "Not bad," he murmured. "They're gone for now." She helped him sit near the fire. His skin was cold, his chest rising and falling too fast. She tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against the wound on his shoulder. He winced but said nothing. His eyes stayed sharp, fixed on the horizon, even as his strength began to fade. "They were 4, he said quietly. 3 ran. 1 stayed behind. He'll bring more." Her voice trembled. "Then we have to go. We can't stay here anymore." Shook his head. "They'll track us by sunrise. The desert gives no mercy to the weak." She looked at him, her throat tightening. "Then what do we do?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted toward the north, the direction they'd been heading for days. "There's a narrow pass ahead. My people once used it as a refuge. We'll reach it before dawn. It's the only way." She hesitated, glancing at the blood seeping through the cloth on his arm. "You're bleeding too much. You can't climb in this condition." He turned to her, his voice firm but quiet. "If I fall, you keep going. I won't leave you. You must," he said, his eyes hard as stone. "The spirits chose you. You don't belong to their cruelty." His words cut deep, and though she didn't fully understand them, she knew he meant to protect her even if it cost him everything. She helped him to his feet, and together they started moving again through the narrow canyon. The moon had risen high, casting a pale light over the desert floor. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. The hours that followed blurred together. Rocks, sand, the sound of his labored breathing. She wanted to stop, to rest, but he kept pushing forward, his body driven by something more powerful than pain. When they finally reached the base of the cliffs, he paused and pointed to a narrow crack between two slabs of stone. "There," he said, "that path leads to the old ground. Once we reach it, we'll be safe." She looked up at the steep incline, her chest tightening. "How will we climb that?" He gave a faint smile. "One step at a time." They began the ascent, hands gripping the cold stone, feet finding narrow holds in the rock. The air grew thin, and the wind howled against their faces. She climbed behind him, watching his strength falter but never break. When she slipped, he reached down and caught her wrist, his fingers trembling but sure. "Don't look down," he said. She tried to focus on the sound of his voice, steady and calm, even through the strain. The climb seemed endless. By the time they reached the top, her hands were raw, and his wound had reopened. He collapsed to one knee, his breath ragged. She knelt beside him, panic rising. "Please rest." "Just for a moment," she said. He shook his head, forcing himself up. "Not yet. We're almost there." They crossed a ridge where the land opened into a wide basin surrounded by red cliffs. The moonlight revealed faint shaped stone ruins half buried by sand, remnants of what might once have been homes or sacred shelters. The air felt different there, heavier, filled with something ancient. "This is it," he said softly. "The valley of my mother's blood." She turned slowly, taking in the strange beauty of the place. The silence was deep, but not empty. It felt as if the land itself was watching. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "It's also dangerous. This ground remembers everything the living and the dead." They found shelter in a hollow beneath one of the cliffs. He sank down, leaning against the stone, his face pale. She knelt beside him, cleaning his wound as best she could. When she finished, she noticed something else's necklace around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt. It was made of bone and turquoise, carved with the shape of a hawk. She touched it lightly. "What does this mean?" He opened his eyes, his voice low. "It's a promise. My mother gave it to me before she died. She said one day it would lead me to what I was meant to protect." Her fingers froze on the pendant. "And you think that's me?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked past her to the entrance of the hollow. "They'll come soon. The man who leads them won't stop." "You saw him?" "Yes, he's not a stranger to me," he said. His voice hardened. "He rode with the soldiers who burned our village. He wears the same scar." She stared at him, realization dawning. "So this isn't just about me." "No," he said quietly. "It never was." The truth sank into her like a stone. Whatever fate had drawn them together, it was tied to something far older than her own story. She felt the weight of it, the loss, the blood, the vengeance buried in the sand. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying faint sounds again. Horses, voices. He tensed. "They're here." Her pulse quickened. "How did they find us so fast?" "They followed the blood," he said bitterly. He reached for his bow, but his strength was failing. She grabbed his arm. "You can't fight them like this." He met her eyes, his expression calm despite the storm closing in around them. "Then I will die as a warrior should." "No," she said firmly, surprising even herself. "You can't, not for me." His gaze softened, the faintest trace of warmth breaking through the cold. "You still don't understand." "It's not for you." It's for what you carry. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? He hesitated, then said, When the spirits brought you to my tipi, I knew. You are the bridge between two worlds, the one that destroys and the one that survives. If you live, my people's memory lives. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I'm no one. I was just running. He reached out, his hand brushing her cheek. You ran because fate chased you. Now it's caught us both. Before she could respond, a shout echoed through the valley. She turned toward the sound, seeing torches moving between the rocks. The glow of fire grew brighter, closing in. The men were spreading out, their shadows long and sharp against the cliffs. Silent Hawk stood, gripping his bow with his good hand. Stay behind the rocks, he said. When I tell you to run, you run north. Don't stop. She stood too, shaking her head. I won't leave you. He gave her one long look, full of something that felt like goodbye. You must. The torches drew nearer, their light flickering across the red stone walls. The wind howled through the valley, carrying the smell of smoke and dust. She could hear the men shouting orders, their boots striking the earth. He stepped forward, his silhouette framed by the firelight. The moon caught the edge of his face, his hair blowing in the wind. There was no fear in his stance, only the calm of a man who had already faced death once before. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears burning her eyes. The sound of horses grew louder. Then came the voice of the man leading them, harsh, familiar, the same one she had heard on the night of the attack. Bring me the girl. He shouted, Kill the savage if you have to. Her heart stopped. Silent Hawk's grip tightened on his bow. He turned his head slightly toward her, his voice barely a whisper. No matter what happens, you keep moving. Do you understand? She nodded, though her throat felt locked. The first bullet hit the rocks, spraying dust into the air. Then came another. He drew his bow and fired, the arrow flying straight into the dark. A cry followed. The battle had begun. The firelight danced wildly as the chaos unfolded. She ducked behind the stones, her heart hammering, watching the man who had become both her protector and her fate stand alone against the storm that had hunted them both. And in that moment, she understood whatever happened next would change them forever. The desert had claimed them. The night was about to decide which one it would keep. The gunfire tore through the night, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder trapped between stone. Smoke and dust filled the air, and the smell of gunpowder burned her throat. She crouched behind the rocks, hands pressed to her ears, watching flashes of light streak across the darkness. Silent Hawk moved like a shadow among the fire, his arrows flying fast and sure, each one finding its mark. But there were too many of them, their torches turning the sacred valley into a sea of flames. She could see him now, standing near the cliff edge, bow in hand, his chest rising and falling with every breath. A figure emerged from the smoke, the man who had hunted her since that terrible night. His face twisted with hate, his gun raised. You should have stayed where you belonged, he shouted. Silent Hawk didn't answer. He loosed another arrow, striking the man's arm and sending the gun spinning into the sand. But before he could move again, another shot rang out from behind. The bullet struck his side and he stumbled backward. She screamed his name and ran toward him, ignoring the chaos around her. He fell to his knees, clutching his wound as the fight raged on. She reached him, dropping beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed them against the bleeding wound. You can't leave me, she whispered. Not after everything. His breath came slow, ragged. You must run, he said. You were meant to survive, not me. No, she said fiercely. We're both getting out of here. The leader staggered closer, holding his injured arm. His voice was cold, filled with hate. You think that Savage can save you? He'll die like the rest. Her eyes burned with fury. She reached for the fallen pistol in the sand, her hand shaking as she aimed it. The man froze, shocked that the woman he once chased now stood defiant before him. Her voice trembled, but her aim didn't waver. No one dies tonight, she said. Before he could take another step, she fired. The shot echoed through the valley, louder than all the rest. The man fell backward, his weapon dropping beside him. The remaining riders, seeing their leader down, turned their horses and fled into the night. The sound of hooves faded until there was only silence again, deep, hollow silence. The fire crackled weakly around the camp, and the smoke began to clear. She knelt beside Silent Hawk, tears streaming down her face. His eyes were half open, his breath shallow. "It's over," she said softly. "They're gone." He gave a faint smile. "Not yet," he whispered. "You still must reach the North Ridge. Beyond it, there's a village. My mother's bloodline. They will take you in." "I'm not leaving you," she said. "You saved me. You gave me life when I had none. Please, let me help you." He reached out and brushed her cheek with the back of his hand. His touch was warm despite the blood. "You already did," he said. "When you walked into my tipi, I thought you were lost. But the truth is, you brought me back from the dead." She shook her head, crying harder. "You can't talk like that." He looked at her with calm, unshaken eyes. "The desert gives what it takes, but it never forgets." She leaned close, holding him as the night wind swept through the valley. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she felt it, the faint rhythm of his heartbeat slowing against her chest. Her breath caught. She whispered his name again and again, as if saying it could keep him alive. But his eyes closed gently, the pain leaving his face. His last breath left in a whisper that she barely heard. "Now you're free." She held him until the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The sky turned gold, painting the valley with warmth that felt cruel against her grief. She didn't know how long she sat there, only that the sun rose higher and the world moved on while she stayed still beside him. The hawks flew overhead, circling the cliffs like silent guardians. When she finally stood, her legs trembled. She looked around at the scorched valley, the smoke, the arrows, the broken weapons, and felt the weight of everything they had endured. Then she knelt beside him one last time, removing the hawk pendant from around his neck. She pressed it to her lips and whispered, "I'll carry you with me." She buried him beneath the red stones of his ancestors, marking the grave with his bow and a single feather tied to it. The wind rose again, brushing her hair across her face, almost like a farewell. When she left the valley, the morning light guided her north. The journey was long and quiet. The desert stretched endlessly, but it no longer frightened her. Every time the wind blew, she could almost hear his voice, steady, calm, the way it had been that first night in his tipi. She walked until she reached the ridge he had spoken of, and beyond it. She found what he had promised, a small settlement. Hidden among the cliffs, the people there looked at her with caution at first. But when they saw the hawk pendant, their faces softened. An elder woman stepped forward, touching the necklace gently. "He was one of us," she said. "And now you carry his spirit." He took her in, giving her food and rest. Days turned into weeks, and the wounds of her body began to heal, though her heart remained heavy. She helped where she could, gathering water, tending fires, learning their ways. Slowly, she began to understand what Silent Hawk had meant about the land owning those who listen. It wasn't just survival. It was connection, something deeper, something that bound her to the soil, the sky, and the memory of the man who had saved her life. Sometimes, at night, she sat outside the small hut the tribe had given her. The stars above seemed endless, bright and cold, the same stars she had once seen from his tipi. She would hold the pendant in her hand and speak softly to the wind, telling him what she had seen that day, what she had learned, what she still feared. And every time the breeze shifted, she felt as though he heard her. Seasons changed, and the scars of her journey faded. But she never left that valley. The people began to call her by a name in their tongue, one that meant woman who walks with hawks. She took care of the children, told them stories of the brave warrior who fought not for vengeance, but for protection, for a promise he made under a desert sky, years later. Travelers passing through the northern cliffs sometimes spoke of a woman with golden hair who guided lost souls to safety. They said she knew the land better than anyone, that she could read the wind and find water where no one else could. Some said a hawk always followed her. Circling high above, those who listened closely to her stories always heard the same beginning. She would look toward the horizon, her voice quiet and full of something that felt like both sorrow and peace. "I once met a man who taught me what it means to belong to the land," she would say. "He told me the desert remembers everything. And he was right." Then she would pause, smiling faintly as the wind brushed her face. She would whisper the words that had changed her life forever. "Now you're mine," he had said that night. But what he didn't know was that, in saving her, he had become hers to not as a possession, but as a memory, a promise written into the desert itself. And so she stayed where his spirit still lingered. Among the rocks and wind and open skies where love and loss were one and the same, the land carried his voice in every storm, in every whisper of the night breeze. And as long as she walked that soil, neither of them would ever truly be gone. The desert that once took everything from her had given her something far greater, a reason to live, a story to tell, and a name that would never fade. She looked to the horizon one last time, the sun setting in hues of fire and gold, and felt his presence in the silence that followed. In that stillness, she smiled and spoke softly to the wind. "I'm home."